So, welcome back. Today we will go into the historical impact on femininity and the fear of embracing this dark side of ours. And the goal is to examine the roots of societal and cultural conditioning around femininity, understand how historical events such as witch burning times have shaped contemporary perception of women's roles, and explore the deep-seated fear many women feel towards claiming their dark feminine power. So this will be a broad stroke history that contains specific points to talk about. So we start with going way back 2.5 million years ago until 10,000 BCE. This is a time period called the Old Stone Age. And this is when humans are hunter-gatherers. And during this period, early humans were primarily living in caves or simple structures like huts. Men and women worked together, reflecting matriarchal or at least a strongly cooperative society where survival depended on fertility and the collective well-being. And here is a very important thing. The first piece of art that people found was Venus of Willendorf, symbolizing the sacred feminine deity, emphasizing the importance of fertility goddess worship in these early communities. So around 10,000 BC, we moved into the time when humans invented agriculture and communities started to settle in one place and farm. And that started to create, in some communities, overflow of resources, and in some communities, deficit. This led to a conflict. And this is just one of the philosophies about how patriarchy started to come alive. People were at war trying to take other people's resources in order to protect the survival of their own communities. Despite the shift, the worship of female deities persisted at this period as well. Now we go into the Neolithic period. It is about 8,000 BC to 3,000 BC. And this is when agriculture really took off. Humans started to domesticate animals. And this is a period when cities started to appear. Now we have this higher density of humans living together. And that creates the start of organized religion and rules to maintain the order. So when you think about it, like what would be a really great way to get this high density of people to follow some rules? So let's create some set of rules based on being good person so that there is a way for people to not just be in mass chaos all the time. And again, despite the rise of patriarchy, female deities remained prominent. In Egypt, Isis was worshipped. Inanna was revered in ancient Sumeria, and Greek temples honored Aphrodite and Vesta. This era also witnessed a creation of first temples in the shape of women, dating back 3600 BC. And these temples, shaped with large breast and a belly, featured an opening through which the summer solstice sun would shine through, symbolizing fertility and the sacred femininity. And that opening was where the vulva was placed in that temple that is shaped as a woman. It is important to understand how as simple as how the buildings are made that we go into, enter through the vulva, that impacts how we feel about ourselves as a woman. So let's go to the next period, Bronze Age, from 3000 BC to 1300 BC. And this was a pivotal era in human history, marking a significant technological, societal, and cultural development. We started to have this really stable, many generation of people living together and not moving as much all over the planet. And so we started to see temples being built on these sacred sites. So what was our life as a community when we had the temple as the center of our community? I want you just imagine that you live with your parents and your grandparents and your great grandparents, And the center of the community is building where priestesses, shamans, wisdom keepers, herbalists live, and you would come and visit these temples for your medical care, for counsel. They did all the conflict resolution and communities, and everything was centered around these women who held the core of our soulful, meaningful existence. In ancient Egypt, during this time, the rise of pyramids happened. They worshipped Isis, this winged goddess, for thousands and thousands of years. During the Bronze Age, all over the world, all of these goddesses that looked like birds started popping up everywhere. And yes, there were wars happening as well. But I want us to remember that there was like co-creation and cohabiting of the sacred masculine and sacred feminine in communities for a very, very long time. And then came the turning point. Towards the end of the Bronze Age, Hebrews went from worshipping Asherah to worshipping Yahweh, which was more militaristic male god. And during this time, rabbis started to take over the temples, to push out the priestesses, and to install fear in people who continued to worship Asherah. So now we come to the time of couple hundred years before Christ. And there is a story about a group of Hebrews who worshiped more sacred feminine Asherah, and they started to prepare many generations ahead for the prophet to come. This prophet would be someone who kind of sort out all the unrest that was growing around male dominant militaristic religion. And Miriam, known to many of us as Mother Mary, was identified early as destined mother of this prophet. She was trained as a priestess from a young age. She spent a good portion of her life in the Dendera temple in Egypt, immersing herself in the science and wisdom to embody the frequency and energy of Isis and to be her hands on the ground, so to speak. Then, with her chosen consort partner, she consciously conceived a very specific soul meant to reintegrate the sacred feminine into religion that has been lost. So just imagine Mother Mary, a highly trained priestess. She knows the art of sex magic and the art of conceiving a very specific soul, literally calling into her body, but not doing so without the merging of the sacred feminine and sacred masculine together. This soul, as you imagine, was Jesus, who under Mary's guidance was introduced to the sacred feminine practices in Egyptian temples. So during Jesus' life, the rabbis are taking more and more power, and the Romans are trying to take over the world. Jesus comes and says, I am is the way. In the Bible, it was mistranslated to I am the way. But actually, if you go back and you look at translation, it's I am is the way. So Jesus actually comes to show people that we are source. I am the source is about embodiment and not about reaching God through a rabbi. You can do it on your own. I am, and that's the way. Then, when he met his partner Mary Magdalene, and it's very clear when you read through all the ancient texts that she is a feminine Christ, they started to bring the message about sacred feminine and sacred masculine union. So they are now going around in the very patriarchal society, and Jesus basically saying, this is a sacred feminine, she is a priestess. And the rabbis and the Romans did not like that this man who was telling everybody that they were God was taking power away. So then, despite Jesus' crucifixion, Mary Magdalene continues her work, retreating to Avalon to deepen her understanding of sacred feminine ways before moving to France. And then she spends the rest of her life writing her story, which was then lost and then found again in Egyptian antique fair in 1042. It just emerged out of nowhere. So let's look at Christianity. In the early centuries following Jesus' life, Christianity was a path of love, embracing both the sacred masculine and feminine, aimed at peace and harmony. But around the year 331, under Emperor Constantine, they sought to use religion as a tool to take over the world. So Constantine rewrites the book of Bible, and it was about 400 years after Jesus was born, altering meaning to justify oppression, land theft, and violence. So I want to focus on certain parts that had a very big impact on the next 2000 years. So the original teachings on the sacred feminine were really distorted. The term virgin, once signifying a sovereignty, independent priestess like Mother Mary, was redefined. And they're like, you know what? This whole like sacred sex thing, this is not gonna work. So we'll just say that she got pregnant randomly by God and never had sex. And then they started to paint her in this very pious, pale blue, quiet, poses and wrote nothing about her life or her power. Then they took Mary Magdalene, the female Christ, and misrepresented her as a whore, creating this damaging female archetype. So Constantine actions were driven by a desire to control women who embodied the sacred feminine's wildness and sensuality. And now they have created these two archetypes of women that either you can be a sexless, quiet mom, and if you're not, then you're a whore. Basically, something like light and dark feminine. And Constantine says, oh, there are all of these communities all over the world where the women are in their power and they're being in this truth of the sacred feminine, of the wildness, of the sacred sensuality. And that makes really women uncontrollable. So why don't we create this tool that says you're only good woman if you're pious virgin, and if you're not, you are a whore. And they brainwashed enough people to believe that if you didn't believe this, then you were evil and worshipped the darkness, and you deserve to have your entire life taken away and die. And now Christianity and the Bible was used as a tool to kill people who worshipped the earth, worshipped the Great Mother, that installed this tremendous fear, embodied fear for about 500 of years. Despite this oppressive shift in the countryside, wise women, medicine women continued their practices away from the praying eyes of the city, keeping alive the essence of sacred femininity. But you can see how this was the start of sacred feminine getting really pushed out. And now crusades started to happen from 1000 AD to 1381. The Crusades painted the earth in blood. And after the Crusades, there was still this like two-part system in Europe. In the cities, it was centered around the church and Jesus. And in the rural lands, they had this system where there was some sort of castle that took care of everybody who lived there. And in this system in Europe, what happened was if your husband died, you still had the right to own your land. And woman could have a farm and feed her family and really be able to live off the land and feed her children and take care of the community members. But around 1200, even in those places, non-Christians were branded devil worshippers, making the beginning of the burning times. This is also the time that the lands were seized and the system was changed to landlord system. They were taking lands away. And because land is being seized and women can't support their children, how can women make money? And the only way they can figure it out is having sex with other people. Now women are having sex with other people to make money. And this is making the men a little distracted from being hard workers for the landlords. Now they start to say any woman who is making money by having sex because it's now the only way she can make money because her land was taken away. She's a witch. If older women who were no longer married and her land is taken away, she's angry, and because she's protesting, she's pissed, she's called witch, and she heads removed. The woman could be tortured and burned and called a witch just because they own the land that the church wanted, or just because they were outspoken, just because they were angry, just because they were mad, just because they were empowered, or because they were really in her body. Another thing that happened is there is any woman who was very sensual and very beautiful. Some of the other women who were maybe worried about their husband sleeping with another person, all she had to do was to point to that woman and said she is a witch, and she got killed. So I want us to really see the big picture here. Being sensual, being outspoken, angry, money maker, owning land, it was all paired with death during these times. And they did this in a very purposeful way because when people are afraid, they are very controllable. So the very peak of burning times happened around the year 1500, and around that time there was so much torture and destruction and killing. And they say that in some towns in France no women were left. So during this time the only way for a woman to survive is to be married, to have kids. So we can start to see how we pair fear when we are not married, fear when we speak up, fear when we are angry, fear when we are sensual, fearing of being othering, or when we are choosing not to have kids. This is when a lot of generational trauma has been installed and still lives in us until this time. Now that we've gone through 2.5 million years ago up until 1700, I just want you to zoom out and feel into this whole timeline. So I want us to see that from 2.5 million years ago, when we saw the first signs of human beings on earth, up until when Constantine wrote the Bible in the year 400, the sacred feminine, being in your feminine power, was very much alive in rural lands and different pockets of societies, all the way up to the 1200 also. So we are only 800 years in this time where sacred feminine was associated with fear, the devil, being weird, and really being associated with death. They stole, they basically stole our feminine power. So what do we need to do to put the power back in women? We need to integrate our whole feminine back into the everyday life. And this is why we are doing this work that is so, so important. So I want you to take a moment after listening to all of this and really reflect, really see in your body how this is connected, how your fear of being yourself, being outspoken, being in your power is really connected through these generations back to the burning times when they took our power away, when they installed this fear. If you're gonna embody your power, you're gonna be killed. And this is really important to have this understanding that this is something that is not alive anymore. You are a free person now and you can choose differently. You are living in the time when you can really claim back your power. And we're gonna start to do that in the next day. So I can't wait to meet you tomorrow. We are going to get very practical. How do we get to our dark feminine? And how do we really start to claim this side? So, here is an overarching thing to understand, and this is a key from this lesson. So, do you have any questions about the material I covered today? Use this time when you have access to me and ask any question about material, and I will make sure you get your answer. Use the form below or drop me the email.